They ended my life at 35,000 feet. No warning, no voice, just an email. I'm about to share something personal, but first, drop your city or country in the comments. It came at 2:30 a.m., slicing through the darkness like a scalpel. 1 second I was staring out the plane window, watching Sao Paulo's golden glow sink into the clouds beneath me. The next, I was reading the sentence that made my world collapse in silence. Your employment with Venturon Technologies has been terminated, effective immediately. My heart didn't beat, it dropped. For a moment, I couldn't move. I thought maybe the screen hadn't finished loading, maybe the Wi-Fi was lagging. I blinked, refreshed, held my breath, but it didn't change. The message stayed exactly as they intended. Cold, complete and devastating. They didn't wait for me to land. They didn't call. They didn't thank me. They just deleted me. No human voice, no explanation, just a severance of identity at cruising altitude. The sender? Grayson Hart. The same man who stood across from me 2 weeks ago, looked me in the eye and said, "You're the only one I trust to carry this." I looked around. Everyone else was asleep, curled up in business class cocoons, wine-stained pillows tucked under their chins, safe. While I sat there with the afterimage of that message burning into my vision, breath caught somewhere between a sob and a scream. 10 days, 3 continents, 5 legacy clients, $1.5 billion. I didn't just close that deal, I was that deal. And they threw me away mid-air. I pressed my badge ID against the laptop's fingerprint reader out of instinct. Nothing. Session expired. Slack offline. My inbox wiped. Even the corporate calendar had vanished. They hadn't just fired me, they had erased me. My hands started to tremble. Not from rage, not yet. From something colder. A betrayal so deep it didn't bleed. It hollowed. Then, with a breath that felt like breaking glass, I moved. I reached under my seat, pulled out the second laptop. Matte, black, unmarked, untouchable. The one they didn't know about. The one that held every client deck. Every version of the Trident contract. Every encrypted transcript. Everything I had built when I stopped trusting their promises. The screen blinked awake like a secret finally ready to be told. They thought this was the end of my story. They had no idea. I had already started writing my own beginning. I didn't sleep for the rest of the flight. I couldn't. I sat there, motionless, letting the glow of the black screen paint my face in faint light while the rest of the cabin breathed in sync, untouched. My hands hovered above the keyboard, but I didn't type. Not yet. I wasn't ready to put words to what had just happened, because part of me still hoped I'd wake up in that thin space between dreaming and dissent and realize it had all been some exhausted hallucination. But the silence was too sharp, too real. I kept seeing that subject line every time I blinked. Termination notice. They didn't just fire me, they erased me with surgical precision, like removing a cancer they forgot had kept their heart beating. They waited until the deal closed, until the ink dried, until I was mid-air, unreachable, undefendable, and then cut me loose like dead weight. There's a kind of grief that doesn't cry. It calcifies. I felt it setting in my chest, inch by inch. Not rage, not yet. Just the kind of cold that comes when you finally see something clearly. They were never going to let me stay. They were never going to let me rise. And still, I had hoped. My mind replayed everything in reverse. The Tokyo pitch, the London red lines, the hours in Sao Paulo poring over financial structures while the client grilled me on risk thresholds. I didn't just answer, I anticipated. I adjusted. I closed. Every clause bore my voice. Every slide carried my signature cadence. But none of it mattered, because Mallory Hart smiled prettier. Because I didn't stay small. Because I was the one they couldn't control. They didn't fire me because I failed. They fired me because I didn't. The plane began its slow descent, and still no one knew. No one knew that while they slept, A woman disappeared from the company that had shaped her every waking hour for almost a decade. No farewell party, no thank you speech, just void, just silence. But I wasn't empty, and I wasn't done. I reached for the matte black laptop again, the one that wasn't part of their system. I didn't open any files. I didn't draft any messages. I just stared at the logo pulsing softly in the corner of the screen. Travant. It wasn't a company yet, not officially, but it was real. It lived. It waited. They thought firing me mid-air would end the flight. They didn't realize. I'd already charted another course. It didn't start as a deal. It started as a question no one had the nerve to ask out loud. What if 3 telecom giants stopped fighting each other and started building something together? Everyone thought it was impossible. Too many egos, too many time zones, too many scars from failed integrations that bled into lawsuits and headlines. But I didn't care about precedent. I cared about what was possible, when trust was earned, not bought. The first conversation was quiet. A side exchange at a fintech panel in Zurich, where Louise Matter of Brasilink asked me, off record, if we weren't competing, what could we do together? I didn't pitch him. I didn't sell. I just said, everything. From there, it moved in whispers. I flew to Tokyo under the guise of a product demo, but I was there for Yuki Asano, CTO of Telnova. He didn't believe in promises. He believed in architecture. So I sat across from him in a windowless office at 11 p.m. and pulled out schematics. Our custom security framework, multi-jurisdictional encryption layers, zero trust backbone. His fingers moved over the diagrams like a pianist finding the key. When I finished, he didn't smile. He just said, this could work, if we're first. London came next. Eurocom was the hardest. Linda Clark didn't believe in charm, and she'd eaten slick sales directors for breakfast since the 90s. She read contracts like murder scenes, every line a potential weapon. But she listened. Because I didn't pitch her Venturon's vision, I gave her numbers, compliance forecasts, Brexit-proof clauses, and one thing no one else had given her in 3 years, clarity. One by one, they stepped in. Not with signatures, with silence. The kind that says we're thinking, and then we're testing you. And finally, we're in. 10 months, 5 redrafts, dozens of sleepless nights on planes and in hotel bathtubs with my laptop propped on a towel rack. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. I made it move. Because I knew that if I could get these 3 on the same line, Brasilink, Telnova, Eurocom, Venturon would explode into global relevance. And I did it. I sat at that Sao Paulo boardroom table, back straight, voice steady, while the final signatures landed one by one. I watched the number lock into place. $1.5 billion, 5-year rollout, 5 regions, full cloud migration under our banner. No one had ever done it before. I did. And then, while flying home, after tying the final thread that would lift the company into the next era, they cut me loose. But they forgot something. That deal wasn't Venturon's, it was mine. They said I wasn't ready. They said it with smiles, with long pauses, with vague talk of organizational timing. But the truth? I scared them. It was the deal with the European consortium that should have changed everything. $400 million. Already collapsing when I walked into that glass boardroom on the 32E Verdiping. 10 men in suits, panic in their eyes, the scent of expensive failure in the air. Legal was frozen. Finance was pointing fingers. The VP of Global Sales had gone pale trying to explain why the client walked out mid-negotiation. I wasn't even supposed to be in that meeting. But I stepped forward, picked up the abandoned proposal from the table, scanned it in silence, and rewrote the core structure in 20 minutes. No permission, no applause, just precision. Then I requested a one-on-one with the head delegate. No one stopped me. No one offered help either. By morning, the deal was not only back on the table, it had grown. 2 new territories, a longer term, 0 concessions. They toasted with champagne that night in the executive lounge. Grayson gave me one of his empty grins and said, "That's the kind of leadership we need at the next level." People clapped. Someone whispered EVP in the hallway like it was a prophecy. I didn't believe it. Not then. I'd learned not to expect anything, but a week later, HR confirmed it was in review. I smiled, not because I needed a title, I had already earned one, but because I thought, for one brief moment, they might finally acknowledge what I was worth. Then came the silence, emails unanswered, meetings rescheduled, and then that overheard moment, tucked into a board lunch I wasn't invited to, but was prepping slides beside. Marin's brilliant, sure, but she walks in and no other guy wants to speak. She dominates every pitch. Laughter, not cruel, casual. Yeah, another voice added. She's not EVP material. She's field ops. Too polished, too direct, doesn't leave room. They didn't say I was unqualified. They said I was uncomfortable, too sharp, too visible, too loud to control. I wasn't someone they could place. I was someone they had to contain. And still, I didn't storm out. I didn't confront anyone. I went back to my desk, booked 3 international flights, and got to work on the biggest deal in company history. Because if they wouldn't give me the title, I'd build something so big they'd have to choke on my absence. It started small. A line removed from a slide, a credit left off a meeting summary, a thank you email that never arrived. The first time it happened, I shrugged. The second time, I told myself it was timing. By the 5th time, I stopped pretending. There was no explosion, no betrayal with teeth, just a slow, deliberate forgetting. My name disappeared in inches. I remembered the internal product launch I stayed up 3 nights for, rewriting specs, correcting bugs, coaching a junior team through a live demo so seamless the clients thought it had been rehearsed for weeks. The post-mortem read like a fairy tale. Only somehow, I wasn't in it. At all. I remembered the time I flew to Munich on 18 hours' notice, arrived jet-lagged and flu-ridden, and negotiated a last-minute renewal that saved Q3 revenue targets. Grayson sent out a company-wide memo praising cross-functional teamwork. The entire room had been me and a translator. I remembered sitting in the back of the town hall as the chief strategy officer presented a roadmap I had written. My voice in every phrase, my analysis in every slide. I watched as the room clapped. For him, I wasn't being overlooked. I was being erased. Because I didn't play small. I didn't wait for permission to fix what was broken. I spoke when something needed saying, even when it rattled someone higher up. And people like that aren't easy to manage. They're threats, even when they're right. Especially when they're right. So I became the invisible engine. The fixer behind the curtain, the person who carried the room but never stood at the front of it. And for a long time I told myself that was fine, that it was noble to serve without applause. That power didn't need a spotlight. But silence, when weaponized, stops being humility. It becomes exile. I started noticing it in their eyes, how the boardroom grew quieter when I spoke too clearly. How some men wouldn't meet my gaze when I answered questions faster than they could form them. I watched them nod when I solved problems, then flinch when I didn't defer credit. And the worst part? I played along. I smiled, I stepped back, I allowed the erasure because I thought it would buy me space later. A promotion, a chance. A moment when they'd say now. That moment never came. Instead, they painted over me in real time, not with malice. With indifference, and every time I walked into a meeting with proof and walked out without presence, I left a piece of myself behind. I became a ghost. One they only remembered when everything was on fire and forgot again once it was clean. It was supposed to be a simple client demo. 20 slides, 1 product walkthrough, 30 minutes of buzzword choreography. Mallory Hart had only been in the role for 6 weeks. Strategic advisor, though no one could explain what exactly she was advising. She was Grayson's daughter. That was enough. I was in Frankfurt prepping for a partner summit when the call came through. Not from her. From legal. There had been a breach. A dataset from our Singapore pilot client, names, usage metrics, private API keys, somehow ended up on screen during Mallory's live demo. The client was furious. Legal was panicked. Compliance had gone silent. I pulled over in the middle of a snow-choked street and took the call on speaker while dragging my suitcase behind me. They said words like exposure, press, contractual liability. I asked one question. Who was presenting? Silence. Then, Mallory. Later that night, Grayson called. His voice was strained, quieter than usual. She didn't mean to, he said. She's young, she just didn't know. Then softer. Can you fix this quietly? I should have said no, but I didn't. I called in favors from 2 continents. Had the incident reframed as a UI error in a beta build. Fed a line to a trusted tech blogger who owed me a favor. Coordinated a midnight call with the client and took full responsibility, framing it as a pre-integrated testing slip. By morning, the story had already cooled to background noise. No press, no damage, no mention of her name, and I didn't ask for credit. I told myself it was loyalty, that protecting the company meant protecting everyone in it, even the ones who hadn't earned it, even the ones who came pre-installed by bloodline. I told myself it didn't matter that no one thanked me, that my name stayed buried while hers stayed clean. But something cracked that night, not loud, just a quiet shift in temperature, like a room slowly losing heat. Because a week later I walked past her office and heard her laughing. She was retelling the story, but in her version, there had never been a breach, just a tech hiccup during a high-stakes presentation. She made it sound like she handled it, like she had calmed the storm I swallowed for her. I stood in the hallway for a moment, holding a folder she'd asked me to review, and realized something sharp. I wasn't just covering for her. I was being buried beneath her. That day, I handed her back the folder, smiled, said it looked great, but I started saving every file, every thread, every draft she edited, because loyalty without reciprocity isn't loyalty, it's silence. And mine had just reached its limit. I wasn't even supposed to check the deck that night. It was finished. Weeks of late nights, spreadsheets that bled into PowerPoint slides, every word weighed, every number cross-verified. I had left it perfect, ready, but something tugged. I opened the file at 2314, still in my apartment, city lights glowing just past the glass. I expected to skim it once more, maybe tweak a margin or move a logo. Instead, I stared at the document properties. My name was gone. Author, Mallory Hart. At first I thought, glitch. Maybe she downloaded it. Maybe the metadata reset. But then I scrolled through. The layout was mine. The sequence was mine. The structure, mine end to end. But the language? Subtly softened. Bullet points rephrased. A few headlines reworded just enough to feel like she'd been there. Except she hadn't. Not in the midnight negotiations with Telnova. Not in the back-to-back compliance calls with Eurocom. Not in the email chains that ran 37 messages deep between legal teams trying to define what data sovereignty actually meant in practice. She hadn't been there. But now her name was stamped across the front. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't text her. I didn't forward the deck to Grayson with receipts. I just sat there, fingers still curled over the keys while something warm and sour rose slowly up my throat. Not quite rage. Not yet. Just that first flush of disbelief. I closed the file. I didn't fight. I didn't accuse, because I already knew how that conversation would go. They'd say it was collaboration, that we were a team, that I was overreacting. And worst of all, they'd make me feel like I was the problem for wanting my own name on my own work. So I said nothing. The next morning, she presented the deck at the regional alignment meeting. I watched from the side of the room, arms folded. I recognized every slide before she clicked it. Every insight she called a recent thought was a sentence I had once muttered to myself at 2 a.m. on a hotel bed with dry eyes and stale coffee. She smiled through the presentation like she'd carried it from idea to impact, like it had always been hers. No one questioned it. No one noticed, except Jenna, my old partner from legal, seated 2 rows back. She caught my eye once, just once, and gave the smallest shake of her head. That was all it took. I smiled too, because I wasn't angry. I was documenting. And when silence is sharpened by patience, it cuts far deeper than noise ever could. I didn't leave Ventron. Not yet. I smiled in meetings, delivered results, responded to every 11:58 p.m. urgent email with a calm, all handled. I wore the armor of the reliable one, the closer, the woman they always called but never invited to stay. But underneath, I had already begun the escape. It started in fragments. A hallway conversation with Raheem Silver, once the architect behind our most agile systems before his team got restructured into irrelevance. A quiet drink with Jenna Park after she'd been passed over for head of legal for the third time. This time, for a man she used to coach through regulatory briefings. A late-night message from Noah Tan, who'd built our risk model from scratch and had now been sidelined for being too detailed. We didn't call it a plan, not at first. We just talked about what could have been, what the company used to be, the speed, the clarity, the hunger, before the glass walls and polished slogans, before the safe hires and scripted roadmaps, before the soul got traded in for optics. And slowly I started to build. No investor decks, no seed round announcements, just a name, Travant, meaning to carry forward. I bought the domain, set up encrypted comms, no logos, no cloud sync. Everything offline, everything intentional. We weren't building a rival, we were building a correction. A company designed not around hierarchy, but capability. No politics, no performance theatre. Just people who had been overlooked long enough to know how to build in the dark. I didn't leave Ventron, not when I should have, not even when I saw the signs. Because I needed time. Time to build a foundation without being seen. Time to watch them mistake silence for obedience. Time to gather every insight, every friction point, every inefficiency they refused to fix because the politics of power made fixing it too inconvenient. Travant became my side current. While Ventron demanded reports, I was sketching alternatives. While they congratulated Mallory on progress she didn't earn, I was architecting frameworks that didn't need her name. We met in apartments, on burner phones, on rooftops and coffee shops and encrypted calls during layovers. Our pitch deck was never written. Our roadmap lived in lived experience. The kind that doesn't need bullets or buzzwords. They thought I was loyal. I was preparing, because I knew one day they'd cut the cord, and when they did, I wouldn't fall. I'd fly. The meeting was set for 7:30 p.m., but Yuki Asano walked in at 7:18, silent, precise, unreadable. He didn't shake my hand, didn't ask about my flight, just sat down across from me in the narrow, glass-walled conference room, overlooking the Tokyo skyline and said, "Your encryption protocol, walk me through it." No preamble, no time wasted. I didn't reach for the pre-approved slides. I didn't open the company deck. I pulled out a printed spec sheet, the one I'd rewritten myself after realizing our internal team's language sounded like it had been written for investors, not engineers. I started with the core. Multi-jurisdictional compliance layering, dynamic key rotation, full zero-trust deployment modeled specifically for telecom-grade latency. No buzzwords, just clarity. I didn't try to impress him. I tried to speak the way I wished people had spoken to me, plainly, like my time mattered. He didn't interrupt once, but he listened with a stillness I hadn't seen in any of the other rooms, not even Grayson's. When I finished, he studied the document in silence. Then he said, "This isn't the standard Venturon model." I met his eyes. "No." A pause. "Then why are you showing it?" "Because the standard won't work for you." Another pause. Longer. He leaned back, just slightly. "Most executives defend the deck. I'm not most executives." A long moment passed before he finally smiled. Small, precise, but real. "I see why they send you." What he meant was, I see that you do the work. I see that you understand the work. And that was the first shift. After the meeting, we walked together to the elevator. The building had grown quiet, just us and the janitorial crew humming softly in the corners. At the doors, he hesitated. If there was another model, he said, eyes still on the floor display, one that offered the same architecture but fewer political delays, would it still be Venturon? I didn't answer right away. I just said, that depends on who's asking. He didn't respond, but when the doors opened, he stepped in and looked back at me. Send the specs again, he said, privately. And then he was gone. I stood there in the lobby, heart steady, hands loose at my sides. I hadn't pitched Travant. I hadn't needed to, because when you speak the truth, it doesn't need volume. It just needs someone who's finally ready to hear it. The meeting was already tense before I walked in. Eurocom's legal team didn't believe in courtesies. They believed in clauses. There were 5 of them, 3 lawyers, a contract analyst, and the general counsel, Linda Clark, whose reputation preceded her like the crack of thunder before a storm. She didn't rise when I entered, just looked up once, nodded and said, "We've reviewed your draft. It won't hold under Brexit's revised Article 18C. Her voice was calm. Final. Like she'd already buried stronger proposals before lunch. The version she was referring to wasn't mine. It was Venturon's standard MSA, overwritten with years of recycled language, half of which contradicted itself across borders. I'd flagged it. They hadn't listened. So I rewrote it. Alone. In a rented flat in Shoreditch, under a flickering desk lamp, using the compliance matrix Jenna and I had built quietly over the last 3 months. I opened my folder. No slides. Just a 14-page contract. Lean, sharp, written in their legal dialect, not ours. "That's not the template we received," one of the younger associates said, frowning. "It's the one that works," I said. "Takes your post-Brexit risk tolerances into account, updated definitions of data transit, and full jurisdictional fallback without triggering default arbitration." Linda took it without a word and began reading, line by line. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's watch ticking. At page 7, she paused, looked at me. "You wrote this?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. She didn't smile, but the air shifted. "It's not standard. Neither are your expectations." She let the paper fall lightly on the table, like it was heavier than it looked. "You're not legal," she said. "No. But you understand what's at stake." I nodded. "I don't need a law degree to know what silence costs." There was a flicker behind her eyes. Recognition, not of me, but of the work. "We'll review it internally," she said. "Of course." The meeting ended 20 minutes later. No handshakes, just quiet acknowledgements. But as I gathered my things, Linda spoke again. "Ms. Blake?" I turned. "Next time you're not representing someone else," she said. "I'd like to see what your firm can offer directly." I didn't answer, not with words. I just nodded, once, and walked out knowing something irreversible had just happened. Because she didn't see Venturon anymore. She saw me. I rerouted myself through Buenos Aires. No one knew. The internal itinerary showed my flight as arriving the following day, just in time for the final meeting with Brasilink's executive team. I had needed rest, according to Mallory's update to Grayson. I let her think I was still in the air. "In werkelijkheid was ik al op de grond," en ik werkte. The risk wasn't the client, it was the company behind me. Too many messages had gone unanswered. Too many last-minute edits to the pitch deck I'd already finalized. And then, there was the email from Mallory's assistant, thinly veiled as support, asking for visibility into my negotiation notes. She hadn't been on a single call, but now she wanted access. I didn't confront her. I changed my flight, booked a separate hotel. No digital trail. By the time they thought I was en route, I was already sitting across from Luis Mata, CEO of Brasilink, in a quiet, windowed conference room overlooking Avenida Paulista. He didn't waste time. "Why should we trust this deal?" he asked, straight-backed, voice low. "Because I didn't sell you a platform," I said. "I gave you a strategy." He nodded once, then opened the folder. We went through every point: data sovereignty, latency metrics, capital exposure, shared risk ratios. I answered without notes, without slides. I didn't need them, I was the framework. He leaned back after 2 hours, studying me like I was a puzzle that refused to crack. I trust you, Marin. I waited. But I don't trust Venturon. I met his gaze, steady, honest. Neither do I. Silence, not tense, clean. He tapped the table slowly with 2 fingers. If this falls apart later, it won't, I said. Unless you leave. That's when I leaned forward. And if there were a way to keep the deal but remove the risk? He tilted his head. You mean less bureaucracy? I mean fewer middlemen, more execution, direct integration. He nodded, slowly, like he'd been waiting for someone to stop dancing and finally say it plain. You have my number. I stood, shook his hand. No performance, just alignment. That night, back in the hotel room no one at Venturon knew I had booked. I opened my black laptop, pulled up the final contract summary, reviewed every term. The deal was done. No interference, no sabotage. And Mallory, she was still prepping for a meeting I'd already finished. They thought I was still flying. They didn't know I'd already landed. At 2:32 a.m., the screen blinked again. Access denied. I refreshed. Tried Slack, tried Outlook. VPN wouldn't connect. The digital walls were folding in one by one, clean and silent. They didn't just fire me. They locked me out mid-air. The glow from my laptop dimmed as the system logged me out, one credential at a time. My badge was still in my bag. My name was still printed on contracts they hadn't read. But in their system, I no longer existed. My seat felt colder. Around me, the cabin slept on, tucked under blankets, heads tilted toward false peace. No one noticed that in row 4A, a woman had just been erased. There was no alert, no phone call, just a quiet boot to the chest at 35,000 feet. They waited until I was suspended between hemispheres, between the past I built and the future I had already begun. A surgical strike. Clean. Cowardly. I tried one last thing, my calendar, gone. Then I closed the laptop. Not the matte black one, the company one, the one they thought was my only tether to the work. The truth? They were late. 6 weeks ago, I followed protocol. I'd initiated a personal backup, citing cross-border risk. The legal team signed off, standard for global deals. No one looked closer. Everything was there, every version of every contract. Notes, feedback, voice memos, meeting logs. I hadn't stolen anything. I had built everything. They had taken my access, but I was the access. I reached beneath the seat and pulled out the other machine, the one with no Venturon logo, no ties, no dependencies, just quiet readiness. The logo pulsed on the screen. Travant. I opened the encrypted folder. Tokyo, signed, London confirmed. Sao Paulo, closed. They thought they'd taken the crown off my head, but I had already built another kingdom. The fury didn't come. Not yet. What I felt was colder. Not revenge, not even vindication. Just proof. Proof that I'd always been right to prepare. Because power never protects loyalty. It protects itself. They had cut me loose in the sky, but I was already soaring. The matte black laptop sat on the tray table like a secret no one had thought to search for. Outside the window, the sky was nothing but shadow. Below us, some unlit piece of ocean or land blurred into dark glass. I could still feel the echo of the email in my chest, like pressure after turbulence, except the turbulence had been man-made. Venturon had locked me out. Every system, every file, as if the work could be erased by a revoked login. But this machine didn't care about passwords they controlled. It didn't recognize their domains or depend on their permission. It pulsed awake like it had been waiting, patient and precise. I logged in. No friction ever. The home screen loaded clean, 3 folders, one for each client, one for each city, one for each part of the future they tried to bury. Everything was there. The updated compliance contracts for Eurocom, every clause vetted by Jenna, the encryption architecture for Telnova, tested and retested by Raheem, the real-time integration roadmap for Brasilink, forecasted and sealed by NOAA. Not a stolen copy, not a backup, a blueprint. Ours. Built with the hands they tried to silence. I clicked through each folder, scanning the details like a final systems check before launch. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like alignment, like something that had always been coming finally arriving, just slightly ahead of schedule. Venturon hadn't just freed me. They'd made the timing perfect. Because now I could act without hesitation, without guilt, without needing to pretend I was still on their side while quietly working for something that actually deserved to exist. Travant wasn't a rebellion. It wasn't even a reaction. It was a correction, born not out of anger but clarity, not in noise but precision. They had built their empire on hierarchy, on proximity to power. We were building something else, something flat, clean, agile, human, not louder, sharper. I minimized the folders and opened the internal dashboard we'd built in parallel. No one at Venturon had ever seen it. Why would they? It wasn't meant for them. 3 client names blinked across the interface, not in progress, not pending, ready. They had chosen me, not the company that paid my flights. They had watched who carried the weight and who showed up for the photos. They had known before I did that the name on the badge didn't match the name doing the work. I stared at the screen, then opened a blank document. 3 words. Let's begin. Then I closed the lid, leaned back, and exhaled. The plane kept flying, but for the first time, I wasn't being dragged. I was steering. The city looked the same. From the back seat of the taxi, I watched the skyline crawl past, steel and glass catching the morning light like nothing had changed. But everything had. The email still echoed in my blood, the silence of it, the sharpness. It was 8:40 a.m. when I stepped out in front of Venturon headquarters for the last time. The lobby was colder than I remembered. Daniel, the security guard, froze when he saw me. He had always smiled, always waved, but this time he shifted awkwardly, hands hovering near his belt like he wanted to do something but didn't know what. "Ms. Blake," he said, voice low. I wasn't told you'd be coming in today." "I wasn't told I wouldn't be," I replied. I lifted my badge and pressed it to the gate. Red light. Access denied. Daniel winced. "HR flagged it this morning. I'm sorry. I have to call upstairs." I nodded, calm. I didn't ask him to make an exception. It wasn't his failure to fix. The glass turned reflective in the morning light. I saw myself, still in the same clothes I wore on the plane. Still steady, but something in my eyes had gone quiet. I waited for the elevator anyway. No one stopped me. The receptionist didn't greet me. Someone had already taken my name off the meeting room sign outside the 27th floor. The door now read Strategic Integration, VPM Heart. No mention of me. No trace. The floor was surgical in its silence. The analysts I'd mentored avoided my eyes. One rose from his chair and walked quickly to the break room, like my presence made the air too thick to breathe. When I reached my desk, it wasn't mine anymore. The plants I'd kept alive through red eyes and reorgs? Gone. The thank you letter from Eurocom, once framed beside my monitor? Vanished. Even the chair was new. The plastic still smelled like factory air. My nameplate had been removed, not relocated. Removed. There was a newsletter left on the corner of the table. I picked it up. The headline read, Mallory Hart to lead Trident Global Expansion. There was a paragraph, something vague about transition leadership. My name didn't appear once. I stood for another minute, staring at the desk like it might return something. Memory, maybe, or closure. It didn't. I dropped the newsletter in the bin and turned to leave. No one stopped me. No one asked why I came. And as I walked back into the morning, into the noise of a city that had no idea I'd just been erased, one truth anchored me. They had removed me from the system, but they'd never built one strong enough to hold me in the first place. The room was quiet, not the kind of quiet that follows endings, but the kind that precedes something inevitable. My laptop hummed beside a black coffee and a croissant I had no intention of eating. The view outside the hotel window was soft and indifferent. Boats inching across the river, early sunlight spilling like it didn't care who had been erased yesterday. I had everything I needed. Encrypted portal open, contact list clear, message template reviewed. Each email was only 4 words. Simple, precise, unmistakable. The door is open. I sent the first to Yuki Asano. Tokyo, then Linda Clark. London, then Louise Mata. Sao Paulo. I didn't follow up. Didn't nudge. Didn't hope. These weren't cold leads. These were people who had seen the difference between the voice that spoke from experience and the voices that read from scripts. I closed the laptop gently, like sealing something sacred. The silence around me didn't grow heavier. It grew cleaner. Back at Venturon, I could picture it clearly. Grayson walking into Monday's executive meeting expecting status updates, maybe a LinkedIn briefing from Mallory's team, perhaps a soft rollout strategy now that I'd been erased. But what he'd get was silence. Because Yuki wouldn't answer. Linda wouldn't respond. Louise would be unavailable. And none of them would explain why. Because some exits aren't loud. Some revolutions don't need banners or flame. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is leave quietly, with everything they thought they owned still trusting you. By the time the emails landed, Travant's portal had already begun tracking activity. Not IP addresses, not logins, just intention. Session logs, calendaring requests, quiet steps toward transition. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. The kind of shift you can't stop once it begins. Each client scheduled exploratory calls within the hour. One with Jenna, one with Raheem, one with me. No press. No headlines. Just motion. Venturon wouldn't know what was happening, not yet. They'd think it was a stall, a delay. Maybe they'd even blame it on me again. But they wouldn't understand the truth until it was too late. That trust isn't transferred, it's withdrawn. I sipped the coffee, bitter, cold, didn't matter. The future had already tilted, not because I demanded it, because I built it. It started just after 9:00 a.m. Grayson walked into the Monday leadership meeting expecting momentum. Follow-ups, progress reports, maybe a few lingering handshakes to clean up the Trident deal I had transitioned out of. He still thought that word meant something polite. His assistant handed him the first report. He skimmed it, blinked, read it again. Telnova hadn't responded. Yuki Asano, who never left a message unanswered longer than 6 hours, had gone silent. No reply to the recap email. No confirmation for next week's integration demo. No sign-in to the internal portal. They tried again at 9:23, then again at 9:37. Still nothing. Then came the bounce from Eurocom. Linda Clark's office returned a terse auto-reply. Out of office. Please direct all Trident-related communication to your current point of contact. Grayson froze. Because they didn't have another point of contact. Not anymore. At 10:11, Mallory joined the call, flanked by a junior compliance manager and a marketing coordinator, who looked like they'd barely slept. Grayson didn't sit. He paced. "Try Brassilink," he said. His voice was still low, but the edges were starting to fray. Louise Mata's assistant answered on the second ring. "Is Mr. Mata available?" A pause. Then, calmly, "Unavailable for Ventron." Grayson tried to speak. Failed. The call ended in silence. By 10:45, the executive room looked less like a boardroom and more like a bunker. Hands on hips, screens refreshed again and again as if the data would somehow change if stared at hard enough. By 11:00, the panic had stopped whispering and begun to shout. Why aren't they answering? Is this retaliation? Is someone interfering? But no one could name it, because no one could see it. There was no memo, no public statement, no warning shot. Just quiet refusal. It wasn't rebellion. It was absence. And absence can be terrifying, especially when you're used to owning the room. At 11:32, someone in investor relations suggested putting out a soft press note, something to stabilize confidence. Grayson agreed. They drafted it quickly, naming the Trident partners and reaffirming Venturon's continuing leadership in the integration phase. Only one partner responded. 4 words. Venturon no longer speaks for us. Back in my hotel room, the laptop screen blinked with new activity. Yuki had scheduled a private technical session. Linda had requested revised contract terms. Luis had added 2 members of his internal ops team to the portal. No drama, no celebration, just the quiet turning of a tide. The thing about silence, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening and you're no longer part of it. It went live at 9:30 a.m. sharp. No press conference, no champagne, no staged photo in front of a digital globe. Just a clean, quietly timed update posted to Travant's media portal. Travant Inc. announces strategic partnership with Telnova, Eurocom, and Brasilink, valued at 1.5 billion over 7 years. That was it. No flourish, no founder quote, just infrastructure details, a timeline, and a contact email. The way real work speaks, without decoration. By 9:47, the first journalist DM'd me, someone from TechScope. The subject line just read, "Wait, what?" By 10 in war, my inbox was pulsing. Analysts, editors, fund managers, mid-tier VCs pretending to be casual. They all asked the same thing in different words. How did this happen? Because until this morning, Travant didn't exist in their world. There had been no teasers, no leaks, no LinkedIn hype cycle, just a press release that looked like a mistake, like someone had forgotten to loop in the old gods before setting something new in motion. At 10:13, someone at TechWatch Global ran the headline, "The Silent Takeover. Who is Travant, and why is everyone at Venturon panicking?" By 10:45, it was trending. Inside the Venturon tower, I could picture it. Mallory refreshing every trade site, face tightening, Grayson pacing, voice rising, calls unanswered, clients gone, press blindsided. But I didn't need to see it, because the sound of silence spreading is something you can feel, even from 32 floors away. At 11:06, Jenna texted me one line. They're drafting a counterstatement. At 11:12, too late. She was right, because it wasn't just a deal. It was a verdict. 3 clients had walked, quietly, together, on their own terms. And they hadn't chosen noise, they'd chosen trust. My name wasn't even in the release. On purpose. Because this wasn't about me reclaiming the spotlight. It was about showing that the spotlight had never mattered in the first place. By noon, VentureWire called it the most disciplined pivot in enterprise tech since Altavix. By 12:30, 5 more partnership requests had landed in our inbox. And still, I said nothing. No victory speech, no social media thread, no public dig. Because when the result speaks loud enough, you don't have to. The room smelled like desperation disguised as luxury. Polished glass tables, velvet drapes in Venturon blue, a branded welcome banner fluttering slightly in the recycled air. It looked like a summit, but I knew the truth. It was triage. Grayson stood at the front of room C214, flanked by 2 compliance leads and Mallory, now visibly trying to grow into the title they had stitched to her like a costume. Her blazer looked too stiff, her smile too wide. Across from them sat Marek Dvorsky, CEO of MER Cloud Solutions, broad-shouldered, thoughtful, the kind of man who let you talk long enough to trap yourself. I waited until 9:15 a.m. Then I walked in. Not announced. Not invited. I didn't need to be. Grayson's voice faltered mid-sentence. Mallory blinked. Someone dropped a pen. I didn't stop walking until I stood at the head of the table just opposite Marek. He looked up. Recognition flickered. "Maren?" he asked. I smiled. "Good to see you again, Marek." Grayson stepped forward. "This is a closed session." I didn't look at him. "Actually, it's a joint review. Your team submitted 2 versions of your infrastructure specs. The summit board requested alignment from both parties." Marek turned slowly to Grayson. You submitted conflicting statements? No one answered. I opened my folder. No theatrics. Just clarity. A lean, clean infrastructure roadmap, tailored to MER's regional rollout. Real specs, real timelines. No recycled promises. Their CTO had already reviewed it in silence 2 days earlier. This is Travant's model, I said. Tested, signed, ready. Grayson stepped in again, louder now. She's attempting to undermine... I looked at him then, finally. I'm doing what you didn't, I said. Delivering truth, not theatre. The room held its breath. Marek looked back down at the roadmap. His legal counsel whispered something. He nodded once. Then he turned to Grayson. We'll proceed with dual review, he said, but Travant's proposal will be considered primary. Grayson froze. I could have left it there. But I didn't, because I didn't come for the win. I came for the correction. One condition, I said. All eyes turned back to me. I'll proceed with shared infrastructure, but only if he's not involved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I don't work with people who fire their architects mid-flight. Marek didn't blink. Understood. Grayson's face folded in on itself. There was no protest left, no voice, just the weight of a game that no longer belonged to him. He left the room without a word. I gathered my folder, nodded to Marek, and stepped into the hallway. Jenna was waiting by the elevator. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. We had just taken back the room they once stole from me. Quietly. Completely. The sky over Munich looked soft that morning. Not triumphant. Not dramatic. Just clean. Like someone had finally exhaled after holding it in too long. I stood at the window of the hotel suite, watching the world move like it had no idea what had just shifted. But I knew. And so jeden sie. Grayson had left the room without a word. Mallory hadn't followed. The pitch was over. The game was over. And no one clapped because no one needed to. Balance doesn't ask for applause. It settles in quietly, like truth returning to its proper place. Back at Travant, Raheem was coordinating the integration timeline with MER's tech team. Jenna had finalized the joint review terms with Eurocom's new council. Linda had stepped down, not because she had to, but because she wanted to finish her career helping build instead of salvage. And Luis? He didn't need to say anything. He sent 3 words that afternoon. We begin Monday. There was no press release, no curated LinkedIn post, no victory parade, just contracts, clean and final. And the subtle understanding in every line, this wasn't a transfer. It was a return. The relationships had never belonged to Venturon. They'd belonged to me, to my voice at midnight, to my fingerprints on their strategies, to the woman who answered when no one else would. They hadn't left because I asked them to. They'd left because they recognized what I had almost forgotten, who the value had always come from. I opened the file one last time that evening, all signatures confirmed, all transition protocols green, no red lines, no questions. The final line of the contract bore my name, not buried in the middle, not ghost-written in someone else's font. Marin Blake, CEO, Travant Inc. For a moment I just stared at it, not for the title, not for the win, for the stillness it carried, the final click of something locking into place. Grayson hadn't taken anything from me. He'd freed me from the lie that loyalty would ever be enough in a system built to keep certain people visible and others useful. Now I was no longer useful. I was necessary. Later that night, Jenna texted me a photo from our new shared office in New York. The plaque had just gone up. Travanta, founded by Marin Blake. No one would erase it this time. No one could. Because the difference now wasn't the clients, or the capital, or even the contracts. It was that for the first time I wasn't asking to be seen. I had become undeniable. T came through as a notification. No subject line, no warning, just a ping on my phone while I was reviewing contract language in the late afternoon sun of our new office. I almost ignored it. Then I saw her name. Mallory Hart has stepped down from her role as Vice President of International Strategy, effective immediately. No statement, no quote, no soft landing. Just a single sentence buried in the middle of a weekly industry digest. No one tagged her. No one commented. No one asked why. She left the same way she had led. Quietly, beautifully styled, but hollow beneath the performance. By the time I finished reading, it was already being buried beneath newer stories. A funding round, a product launch, a scandal at a competing firm. The feed moved on without her. An hour later, another alert. This one from a private channel Jenna still had access to. Grayson Hart, removed from the Ventron board by unanimous vote. No press release, no boardroom rebellion, just removal. A quiet cutting away of what no longer served the narrative. I didn't smile. Not because it didn't feel like justice, it did, but because it didn't need celebration. Their fall wasn't dramatic, it wasn't public, it was gradual and surgical, like the kind of power loss that doesn't crash but dissolves. Mallory didn't fight to stay, Grayson didn't fight to explain, because they both knew. They had bet everything on being seen. But visibility without substance fades. And when the substance leaves the room, so does the relevance. What remained of Ventron had already begun to reshape itself, tight-lipped consultants replacing vision, bandaged solutions where once there had been strategy. The lights were still on, but the soul had long since flickered out. I stood by the window as the city moved below, fast and indifferent. I didn't need to tell anyone what had happened. The silence said enough. They had tried to erase me, quietly, efficiently, and now they were being erased the same way. No scandal, no noise, just absence. And the strange poetic weight of being forgotten by the machine you once believed would protect you. My name hadn't just survived, it had outlived theirs. The sun spilled across the floor as I stepped inside. Early, quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but intentional. Not the hush of absence. The breath held before something begins. The air smelled of fresh paint and wood warmed by light. The space didn't boast. It didn't need to. No marble, no glass ego. Just clean lines, open air, and the steady hum of something honest being built. I walked slowly down the hallway, fingers grazing the wall until I reached it. Brushed steel. Subtle. Solid. Anchored to the entrance like it had always been there. Travanta, founded by Marin Blake. No spotlight, no applause, but it was the loudest moment of my life because I remembered everything that came before it. The meetings where my voice carried the room, but never the credit. The decks I built that someone else presented. The silence that followed every win they didn't want to put my name beside. I remembered the sentence that stayed lodged in the back of my mind. She's brilliant, but she takes up space. And now here I was, taking up space. All of it. I reached out and touched the steel. Just briefly. It was cold. Solid. Real. They tried to erase me with silence. But this spoke louder than anything they ever said. Not revenge. Not spectacle. Just truth. Finally made permanent. Because power that is claimed through ego is always temporary. But power claimed through action, through patience, through clarity, through survival, settles into the foundation. Later the others would arrive. Jenna, Raheem, Noah, with coffees and rolled-up blueprints and tired eyes lit up by purpose. No titles needed, no permission asked. Just builders, doing what we were never allowed to do before. Or start something and sign it with our own names. But for now, I stood alone in the quiet. The company I had once served tried to delete my name, so I carved it into steel.